Alicia Thomas gravestone, which actually was originally placed going in the other direction. It was facing north-south instead of east-west. And so the children or Daughters of American Revolution a few years ago reset it because they felt that it was actually by being faced the wrong way, was not very kind toward the deceased person's spirit.
You know, it's not very often I get visitors up here, so I'm happy to have you. Now, I built the first tavern here in Dover in the Landings back around 1800, between 1800 and 1840. And I got lots of visitors at the tavern. That was the place where everybody came. I got businessmen and lawyers and characters and even politicians. Boy, can those politicians drink. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Nathaniel Elam. I'm buried here. And when you came up, I was admiring this painting done by my good friend William Goodkin. I don't know if you're going to meet him on this tour or not, but William Goodkin painted downtown Dover. This painting is from 1840. I'm told Tom Dunnington from town here actually has the original of this picture. But are any of you from Dover? Okay, so you may, those of you who are familiar with downtown Dover, I was trying to figure out exactly where everybody is here in this thing. And you know, Mr. Goodkin was a character. He painted himself into the picture. And that's him sitting there on the banks. He's sitting on what is now called, I'm told, Henry Law Park. And he's looking across the river there. Now my tavern is the building right here, and it's on Main Street, and it's got a sign in front of it. It's, if you know Dover at all, there's this huge chimney that's still downtown, I'm told. It was part of the power factory for Kachiko, and it's still up there right along Main Street. Well, my tavern was right about where that chimney is, and that was built after my building was removed. The Children's Museum, whatever that is, I'm told is over in this area. You can see the bridge over the water, and that bridge is still there. So that showed you how Dover was in 1840. Dover was an amazing place from 1800 to 1840. Now I was born in 1791 and I died in 1849, so I was kind of young, 57, when I died. So I figured out I've been in this cemetery for about 160 years. So it's pretty good to get out today. It's a pretty nice day, isn't it? But you could come to Ela's Tavern, you could get drink. Of course, I brought a little ale today if you guys get thirsty. I got a bottle of ale and a little hard stuff here. We can have some of that later if you want to stop back. But you could get a drink, you could stay overnight. We boarded people, and if your horse needed to be watched, you could bring your horse, and it was 25 cents a day, feed included. Dover was an amazing place in the 1800s. The Chico manufacturing was eventually built after I died, but before I died, there was still a bustling economy. Ships from the sea were able to come into Dover because the harbor was deep back then. Ships drafted as far as 7 feet down could get into the harbor, and there were at least 4 or 5 wharfs down in this area. And huge amount of industry came in to Dover. A lot of shipping went in and out of Dover. The Hale shipbuilding yard was where Henry Law Park is now. They built ships. Schooners could come in. The schooners that were deeper than 7 feet, that drew deeper than 7 feet, had to moor up the river a ways, and they had gondolas that would go and get the goods, or take the goods to the bigger ships to be shipped out of Dover. Now, you're going to meet another one of my good friends, Jose Sawyer. When you see him, he's old now. Make sure you say hi. I just want to clue you in on another thing. There's 30,000 graves in this Pine Hill here, and there's 30,000 stories. You're only hearing a little bit of one today about the history. But you're going to meet Mrs. Durrell on your 4th stop. Now, I've become good friends with a lot of the people here. Captain Flagg's down there. He was the richest man in Dover. Mrs. Durrell, she was married to a federal judge. But I happen to know that she forgot to put on her fancy shoes today. And you can't tell her where you heard this. And I know they told you not to ask questions. When you see her, ask if you can see her feet. She has on one of those beautiful hoop skirts. And you can't see her shoes, but she'll get a kick out of that. Say, can I just see what you have on for shoes? And see what happens. But don't tell her I asked you to do that. So thanks for stopping by. Thank you for stopping in.
Thank you, Ms. Avila.
And if you need a drink, see me later.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lydia Baker Cogswell. I am the granddaughter of Christine Otis Baker, who was just a baby when she was kidnapped by Indians during a raid here in Dover in 1689. My grandmother was taken to Canada, where she was raised by nuns and eventually married a Frenchman. She later fled Canada and made her way back here to Dover, where she married Captain Thomas Baker. I was born here in 1759. In 1775, just as the Revolutionary War was beginning, I was married to Samuel Wallingford at the First Parish Church, which is just down the road here. In 1776, we had a son, and we named him George Washington Wallingford. Alas, poor George never got to know his father very well because Samuel was killed on the ship the Ranger on April 24th in 1778. Sam was a hero who served on this ship with John Paul Jones. He was with Jones when they raided British ports and ships along the English coast. Sam took part in an attempt to kidnap a British lord in exchange for ransom for American prisoners. But when they got there, the lord was not at home. So they only looted, taking silver and valuables, not causing any harm or vandalism to any of the household members. After the raid, a British ship fired upon the Ranger, and Samuel was killed and buried at sea. I married again, and my second husband was Amos Cogswell. Amos was a soldier in the Revolution as well. He was a soldier from 1775 to 1783 when the war ended. After the war, New Hampshire Governor John Langdon made my Amos a colonel in the Light Horse. Amos also participated in battles at Siege of Boston and Valley Forge with George Washington. He participated in the New Hampshire Senate and the New Hampshire House. After he died, I lived with my daughters in Maine and in Sandwich, New Hampshire, where I died. These are not our original stones. They were placed here many years after our death by my grandson, who also included my first husband's name. Thank you for coming to visit me.
All right, well, good afternoon to you all. I'm Elizabeth Cushing, and I am the oldest colonial soul interred here at Pine Hill Cemetery.
No disrespect meant, Mrs.
Because it's not
Cushing.
disrespectful to interrupt me in the middle of talking to these people.
But I have the oldest headstone here in Pine Hill Cemetery. You may be the oldest soul, but I claim the oldest grave marker.
Well, I was born in Boston in 1691.
Me too.
And married in 1717 after Jonathan, my future husband, finished his education at Harvard College. Our family genealogy, oh no, that's a little bit confusing. Let me see. We were actually related twice. You see, my mother and Jonathan's paternal grandmother were sisters, and our paternal grandfathers were brothers. I proudly bore Jonathan 6 children, but sadly passed away at such a young age. I was only 39.
Okay, that's wonderful.
I'm not done talking yet.
You should come see my son, everybody. I'm Ichabod
Every
Hayes,
time.
and I died on June 1st, 1734, at the age of 43. And this is my original headstone, the oldest one here in Pine Hill Cemetery. And, well, it looks it, doesn't it?
It definitely looks old.
You definitely look old.
I was buried here on December 30th, 1730, 287 years ago, back before this was even an official cemetery. You see, at that time, it was simply my backyard. I know my tomb doesn't look nearly 3 centuries old, and that's because it isn't. In the late 1700s, the Cushing family renovated the tomb, and it was replaced again in 1938 by 3 of my female descendants.
So let's get on to the interesting.
I'm not done yet. My husband Jonathan was the 8th minister of the First Church of Dover, congressional, of course. Reverend Cushing proudly served his parish for over 50 years, earning us nearly £90 a year. Our house stood here on Pine Hill, adjacent to where the 3rd meeting house was. The first 2 were out on Dover Point Road. Reverend Cushing proudly served at this location until the late 1700s, when he had to move to Tuttle Square to accommodate his growing congregation. Jonathan sadly died at the age of 80 in 1769, but my house stood proudly on this very spot until 1810.
Okay, so let's get on to the important thing here, me, because honestly, if I wait any longer, I'm gonna die again.
Almost with the drama.
Father, John
because
Hayes,
they want to hear about your dad.
emigrated from Scotland in 1680. Ahem. There's a monument to my family out on Littleworth Road. Have
Look
you
at me,
seen
I'm
it?
special. I have a monument.
It was erected by my descendants in 1934. My mother, Mary Horn, bore 9 children, of which I
So
was
you went
the
from talking
third
about your father to telling them
oldest.
about your mother.
I married Abigail Evans
Oh
around
look, this time you remembered her name.
around 1715, and we had 4 children. We lived out there in Littleworth until I was, well, I was killed by a mill log. There's no further information available, and honestly, I don't remember too much about the
You
incident.
don't remember much of anything, do you? Getting a little old.
Right. My youngest daughter, Hannah, was born after my death, and, okay, yes, well, maybe there was nothing noble about my existence. At least I was a hard-working man trying to
Every
take
time
care
you have
of
to
his
tell them
family.
that you're hard-working.
Well,
if you
one of us
excuse-
knows what hard work
If
is.
you would excuse me, but it would seem that me and Mr. Hayes here need to have yet another conversation about his manners.
About
Would
mine?
kindly just carry on with your tour group.
Come on this way. Let's get out of here.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to visit today. My name is Mary Durrell, and I'm the widow of Edward Durrell. Edward was buried here. He was born in Portsmouth. He attended Phillips Exeter Academy, graduated from Harvard University, and became an attorney 2 years later. In 1836, he moved to New Orleans and became involved with the city council. By 1854, he was elected to be on the city council director, and being a northern boy in the southern country was pretty difficult because he was a strong proponent of civil rights. And he was the first judge down there to allow the freed black slaves to be on the jury with the whites. This much disturbed the Confederates down there, and he was elected to be one of the senior judges down there by President Abraham Lincoln. However, this did not last too long because he was accused falsely of drinking on the job on the bench, which was totally ridiculous. My husband would never do that. He was a high-standing man and always believed in doing the right thing. And so, consequently, he was in danger of being impeached. So, given that fact, he decided that he would rather resign than go through the torture of that. He moved to New York, where he practiced law, and we met. We moved west of Albany and lived there for many, many years. He began writing a book, actually, about the history of the South and how he really had a heart for freedom of speech, freedom of rights, and was a strong civil rights person. Unfortunately, before he could finish his book, he passed away, and he was moved up here. He's buried here, and on his tomb there is representation of both his service here in New Hampshire as well as New Orleans, and a representation also of his dedication towards human rights. And I appreciate you guys coming. It's been very thankful to see you all here. I wish you the best. Take care.
Feels dizziness. Even the whites of our eyes are turning yellow. I don't wish this sickness on any one of you. Now, we left Portsmouth trying to escape this sickness, but we only made it as far as Dover, and it's here where our journey ended. Oh, excuse me. Now, in the event that we should pass on, you know what I mean by pass on. My name is Moses Little, and this poor unfortunate soul beside me is my own stepson, John Fernal.
We came from Portsmouth, and we're headed to his hometown, Hampton, New Hampshire, when my stepfather, my mother, and I came upon Dover, and we died here in 1798. We're listed as being buried somewhere in the cemetery, but our markers, long gone, have disappeared. When we left Portsmouth, people were dying right and left, from the north end all the way to downtown. Kin were burying their own kin, brothers burying sisters and parents. It was terrible. Even the doctors were sick.
As John was just saying, I was trying to lead my family away from the sickness and go up to Campton, which is my hometown. But we didn't get very far before we were struck down. You see, the fever came to us aboard a ship. A ship that came up from Martinique. A ship that was owned by Thomas Sheep and was captained by John Flagg, whose brother William is buried in this very cemetery. Well, anyway, one or two of the crew actually came down with the sickness, but they recovered. Unfortunately, though, several of the hands unloading the ship actually caught the fever, and from there it began to spread very fast.
It was written that none or few were seen in the streets where the fever raged in Portsmouth, and the moans of the sick and the shrieks of the dying was all that could be heard at night. That is why we left, only to make it here.
In the end, there was over 100 deaths in just 2 months due to the fever and dysentery. In this town, with the exception of John and I, the only Dover death that occurred was Colonel Janfrin Fisher.
The new yellow fever epidemic that swept the New Hampshire seacoast proved deadly. We know from personal experience.
That's so... Oh, excuse me. Can you help me? I can't find my marker anywhere. It's missing. I'm sorry. Let me introduce myself. My name is Anna Farrar. I'm the wife of the Honorable Timothy Farrar of New Ipswich, judge on the Court of Common Pleas. See, I'm buried here in Pine Hill Cemetery, but my husband lived on in New Ipswich until he was 101 years old. He's buried in Cambridge, Massachusetts. See, I know I'm here. I'm buried next to my daughter, Anna. Anna was married to Reverend Joseph Cleary. He was ordained here in 1812 and served at First Parish Church, right up the road. He served there until they split with the Unitarians in 1828. Anna died so young, only 33 years old. When she died, Joseph married our other daughter, Lucy, who was the widow of Reverend Richard Hall. Richard and Joseph were best friends. Lucy lived on until she was 79. She died in Connecticut. Are you confused? You look confused. Well, I've got more. See, this plot was purchased by Horace Hall. Horace is the son of Richard and Lucy Hall, and my grandson. He was friends with my other grandson, Timothy Farrar Cleary. They were friends, went to school together, and both became ordained ministers. They went to Dartmouth College. My husband was a judge on the Court of Common Pleas, and he was a major in the militia in 1775. After that, he served on several committees which developed New Hampshire's new state constitution. In 1791, he was appointed to the New Hampshire Superior Court and became its Chief Justice in 1802. In 1814, he was asked to run for governor, but he declined the nomination. He retired from the bench in 1816. He was also a trustee of Dartmouth College. When he passed on at the age of 101, he was the last remaining Harvard alumni to have graduated before our country's independence, class of 1767. Our son, Timothy Farrar Jr., went to Dartmouth College and studied law in the office of Daniel Webster. He authored many works, but the most memorable was the review of the Dred Scott decision in 1857, the unfortunate U.S. Supreme Court ruling that Negroes were property and not people. Oh, I'm so sorry to keep you. I see, nobody really visits me, and I haven't had a conversation in years. Nobody really knows I'm here. My husband's buried so far away. So if you see my marker, could you let me know? Otherwise, I'm going to be here for eternity. Thank you. Oh, excuse me. Can you help New Ipswich, judge on the Court of Common Pleas. See, I'm buried here in Pine Hill Cemetery, but my husband lived on in New Ipswich until he was 101 years old. He's buried in Cambridge, Massachusetts. See, I know I'm here. I'm buried next to my daughter, Anna. Anna was married to Reverend Joseph Cleary. He was ordained here in 1812 and served at First Parish Church, right up the road. He served there until they split with the Unitarians in 1828. Anna died so young, only 33 years old. When she died, Joseph married our other daughter, Lucy, who was the widow of Reverend Richard Hall. Richard and Joseph were best friends. Lucy lived on until she was 79. She died in Connecticut. Are you confused? You look confused. Well, I've got more. See, this plot was purchased by Horace Hall. Horace was the son of Richard and Lucy Hall, and my grandson. He was friends with my other grandson, Timothy Farrar Cleary. They were friends, went to school together, and both became ordained ministers. They went to Dartmouth College. My husband was a judge on the Court of Common Pleas, and he was a major in the militia in 1775. After that, he served on several committees which developed New Hampshire's new state constitution. In 1791, he was appointed to the New Hampshire Superior Court and became its Chief Justice in 1802. In 1814, he was asked to run for governor, but he declined the nomination. He retired from the bench in 1816. He was also a trustee of Dartmouth College. When he passed on at the age of 101, he was the last remaining Harvard alumni to have graduated before our country's independence, class of 1767. Our son, Timothy Farrar Jr., went to Dartmouth College and studied law in the office of Daniel Webster. He authored many works, but the most memorable was the review of the Dred Scott decision in 1857, the unfortunate U.S. Supreme Court ruling that Negroes were property and not people. Oh, I'm so sorry to keep you. I see, nobody really visits me, and I haven't had a conversation in years. Nobody really knows I'm here. My husband's buried so far away. So if you see my marker, could you let me know? Otherwise, I'm going to be here for eternity. One of the Native American burial areas. And they say that it goes back to the 1400s when it was used solely as a burial ground for them. No one knows how many graves are here, as many have not been marked. Some of the colonists' graves aren't marked, as you know.
Anybody here come down from Maine today? Anybody here from Maine? Well, I'm from Maine, so I want to tell you a little Maine anecdote. There was a farmer, lived in Maine, but right on the New Hampshire border. Now, a geological survey was done, and it turned out that it was pinned incorrectly, and his property actually was in New Hampshire, not in Maine. And his reaction when he found this out was, thank God, because I don't think I can handle another Maine winter. Want to hear another one, or should I not press my luck? Seriously, my name is Moses Paul, and I was born in Waterboro, Maine, in 1797. So I'm not a New Hampshire native, but I did come to Dover when I was 9 years old, and I lived here all the way up until my death in 1860 at age 63. The majority of my life was spent as the agent of the Kachiko Manufacturing Company. And I started there, age 15, as a clerk for my uncle John Williams, who founded the Kachiko Manufacturing Company. And I became the agent, the boss, in 1834 and served in that role all the way until my death in 1860. Little anecdote about my uncle John Williams. In 1813, he had a beautiful brick house built on Central Ave, about 3 blocks from here. And he lived there until 1840 when he sold it to a prominent local gentleman named John Parker Hale. That house, along with the house next door, 76 years later, became the first 2 houses as part of an institution, and the campus that you know today is the Woodman Museum. I loved working at the Kachiko Manufacturing Company, and I was a very popular agent, which was very unusual in those days for the agents to be popular because I took great care of my people. Remember back in early 1860, presidential candidate Abraham Lincoln was here in town. He was staying down at the Corporation House, and he came over and he took a tour of our factory. And I remember what he said to me when I met him for the first time. He said, "Well, sir, as you bear the names of both Moses and Paul, you must be a pretty good man." We got a nice little chuckle out of that. Very gracious gentleman, Abraham Lincoln. In my mortal years, my wife Susan Margaret and I had 6 children, 3 boys, 3 girls, and we lived in a nice house down on Locust Street. That house still stands today. You may have passed it. It's called the Captain Moses Paul House. It's called the Captain Moses Paul House because I was a captain in the Stratford Guards, and I was a very prominent Freemason, and you can see the inscription right here on my stone. 1889, my brother Masons honored me for my service to the order and my service to the community of Dover by naming it the Moses Paul Lodge, the Masonic Lodge here in town. And they still meet today on Paul Street. Some of my contributions to the city include serving as a director of the Stratford National Bank from 1849 to 1859. I was a director of the Dover Dispatch Line of Packets, which was a shipping company. And I also served as town moderator from 1838 to 1840. I could go on, but that's all the time I have. I want to wish you a pleasant rest of your tour through on this beautiful fall day through the cemetery. Thanks for sharing a little local history with us. We're very grateful.
Hello, I'm Samuel Folt, stonecutter and owner of a marble works in Dover. I crafted many of these stones throughout Pine Hill Cemetery. Also, obviously I took great care in planning my own family plot. Sadly, over 12 years, we lost 4 sons before they reached the age of 1. They are buried here along with my wife Roxana, our children and their families. This family plot is amongst beautiful trees and surroundings, though there's often much loudness going on with these hospice carriages flying by down on Watson Street beyond. I lived on Washington Street, 221 to be exact. I had the house built for my family in 1859. I had opened my marble cutting and soapstone business in 1846, and I was one of the longest working stone cutters in Dover, owning and operating my business for almost 50 years. In actuality, many of these stones and monuments that were erected from 1846 to 1896 are my craft work. However, my greatest achievement was designing the Grand Army of the Republic, the JAR monument, which stands behind the chapel where you started your tour. It's a marble and granite monument, 25 feet, and it was dedicated on September the 14th, 1877. It includes the names of 111 Dover soldiers who died during the Civil War. I remember the day it was dedicated. 600 people marched from Franklin Square downtown the cemetery for its dedication. It was quite a sight. I didn't only erect stones and monuments, I was also a politician, serving for the New Hampshire legislature from 1857 to 1858. And 20 years later, I was Dover's mayor from 1887 to 1888. As I grew older, I decided to sell my business to Smalley and White. I lived for a few more years, till I died in 1905 at the age of 86. My beloved wife remained in the house on Washington Street till she died in 1909. If you continue your tour, I'd ask you to take a good look at these stones and monuments in the different styles along these hallowed grounds, because they are truly pieces of art. You know, it gives me a great feeling to know that I had something to do with the carving of many of them in my almost 40 years' work. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Of the work accomplished by and demands made upon the department, together with a list of interments during the year, giving in each case the name and date of death, in particular, place of burial of the deceased. Oh, I beg your pardon, I didn't know you were here. I've been so busy working on my first annual report for the trustees. But I have a few moments since you've stopped by. Let me put this down and introduce myself. I'm Franklin B. Coleman, Superintendent of Burials, Pine Hill Cemetery. I was first chosen by the trustees to be superintendent in 1895. That's when Dover appointed 6 trustees to manage the city cemeteries. Now, I continued in this role, and it seemed to fit me very well because I stayed at it until the year of my death in 1929, when I was a good old age of 77. Prior to the trustees' governance, the city cemeteries were managed by elected officials who served on a joint standing committee of cemeteries. And this joint standing committee was formed in 1855, the year Dover became a city. And the joint standing committee continued its work up until the trustees were first formed in 1895. Well, this new group of 6 trustees were quick to form new rules and regulations for the cemetery. For example, there are several. Some of that I can remember were mounds could be no higher than 4 inches over the graves. No picking of flowers, no noisy conduct, and firearms could not be discharged, except for military salute, of course. Now, I don't want to appear like I'm bragging at all, but I was hired at an annual salary of $382. I was also given a horse, cost $118.50. During my first year as superintendent, I felt compelled to plant as many trees and bushes as I could to beautify the cemetery. In fact, memory serves, and sometimes it doesn't, but I think it does in this case. I think all told, I planted 77 maple trees, 63 arborvitae trees, 20 spruces, 20 rose bushes, and believe it or not, 2 rose trees. If you look around, many of these gorgeous trees were probably the saplings I planted back in 1895. Like many of my friends, I was involved in cities, organizations, and clubs and so forth. And I'm proud of the fact that I was a member in good standing of the International Organization of Oddfellows, Canton, New Hampshire Grange. And some of our founding fathers were a member of that organization, so I think I was in pretty good company. And it may be hard for you to believe looking at me, but I was once a police officer. I was in my late 20s then, 1880 to 1881. You know, I really like my family spot here at Pine Hill Cemetery. Among the colorful trees. This is my favorite time of year, by the way, when the leaves turn color. the air gets crisp. And I know a lot has changed since the 1890s in Pine Hill. Well, with the invention of the automobile. All that noise and smell. But I still think it's a peaceful place to be. And I am so thankful to be here, my family. Well, that report's not going to get done by itself. I'm afraid I'm going to have to get back to it, but I really thank you for stopping by today. It was enjoyable to reminisce about my early days, and I hope you have a pleasant rest of the day. Thank you for coming. Oh, and no unruly noise, and no picking flowers.
Private Augustus Fry, Company K, 3rd New Hampshire, reporting. I like to do that to scare people when they walk by. I used to do it a lot when I was in the Army too, especially when the colonel or the captain were walking by so I could impress them. Well, like I said, my name's Augustus Fry. I grew up in the dusty streets of the Garrison City. Grew up knowing the mills and the cool water of the Cachiko and the Bellamy River. And in 1861, I joined the Army. And about that time was the first Battle of Manassas in Virginia. And the Rebs were approaching on Washington, D.C. And we were worried they might capture the Capitol or even grab President Lincoln. So I had to sign up to do my part. Now, from a boy from New Hampshire, it was quite the adventure being in the Army. We went from New Hampshire to New York, down to Washington, D.C., then to Annapolis, Maryland, and then deep into enemy territory down at Hilton Head, South Carolina. And that's where I found the war. I fought in the Battle of Secessionville and also the Battle of Fort Wagner in South Carolina. Well, I was doing my part, feeling like I was making a difference, and years passed by pretty quickly, and I was almost done my time of enlistment. So I re-enlisted in February 1864. Now, in August of that year, we had the Rebs holed up in Petersburg, Virginia. And then one morning on the 16th of August, we saw General Grant and General Hancock come into camp. And that usually meant we were fixing for a fight. So we had to get ready. We fixed our bayonets. We marched. We counter-marched. We flanked. We marched so much we didn't know whether the Confederates were in front of us or behind us. And we went through the woods and the fields in Deep Run, Virginia, and there we found the enemy. And they advanced on our lines. And we had a heck of a battle, and we fought the best we could. But on that day, Lieutenant Colonel Plimpton, our commander, was shot and killed, along with myself and 93 other boys from the 3rd New Hampshire. But my story doesn't end there. Over here on my stone, right near the bottom, it says, fell into enemy hands. See, I never made it back up here to the Green Hills of New Hampshire. I'm buried alongside my comrades right there on the battlefield in Virginia. Never made it home again. So that's my story, and I thank you for listening to it. You're welcome. Thanks.
Remember when we moved the library in 1886? It was the hottest day of that year.
I do indeed remember that, Beatrice. And then we moved again in 1891 to City Hall. Those were the coldest days of that year.
Oh, but the best days were when we moved to the Carnegie Building on Locust Street in 1905. By then, the library was huge. We had over 33,000 books.
Opening day was a madhouse. I recall 180 people registered for library cards that day, and they checked out 160 books. The first book checked out was the novel Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott.
Wasn't there some controversy about that? I know that some people thought that public libraries should only carry informational and educational materials, and they didn't want nonfiction or fiction. I mean, God forbid.
By the time the new library opened, most people were fairly accepting of the fact that people wanted to also read books that were just entertaining, like novels. But you're right, the controversy did rage for a while, 10 years earlier. I gave a speech at the library conference in Lake Placid in 1894 about that topic. Here's a little bit of what I said. Personally, I would not deprive readers of novels for entertainment only. provided always that they are clean and free from immoral taint. It seems to me a public library is justified in supplying its readers, along with books of ideas and knowledge and instruction, some books for entertainment only. If it be a problem why so many people in the world desire commonplace books, I suspect the answer is found in the fact that so many people are merely commonplace people. I boldly avow that the welfare of the individual and the interests of the community are as highly served by the circulation of that volume of fiction as by a volume of non-fiction. Otherwise, we would all be insufferable prigs.
You are so right, Caroline.
Yes, of course.
You were a woman ahead of your time, and what an inspiration to me during my tenure.
Thank you. I am sure that the public libraries of the future will continue to uphold these standards and traditions. Yes, indeed, mark my words, they will never carry, as I said in my speech, quote, any books that are positively degrading, or, of course, any works with any taint of uncleanliness.
Oh, this was mine.
Anymore, I mean, it's probably been like 75 years since I heard any opera. I mean, there were a couple folks that came through here that was humming something that sounded like opera, but yeah, that was when this gravesite was first built. Actually, maybe it was Mrs. Rounds back in 1916. It's been so long, I don't remember.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know we had an audience. I'm Neely Brown Mitchell, and I'm buried here with my husband and parents. They forgot to put me on, it appears they forgot to put me on the gravestone. I didn't want to be much of a rock star anyway. Dover has changed a lot since I first sang at Free Will Baptist Church on Washington Street. The church is still there. Dover Baptist, I believe it is now called. I was born here in Dover and began singing at the church when I was 20 in 1865 and left Dover in 1872 to be the soloist at Grace Church in Haverhill, Mass. By 1866, I had my own singing company and began to tour the East Coast and Middle West.
Hello, I'm George Seaver, and I'm a violin maker here in Dover. I'm actually just visiting Nellie because I'm actually buried over in Somersworth, but every now and again I like to come over and relive my days here in Dover. You know, my love for music really was always about constructing violins, and actually in my career I made 92 of them. You know, the George F. Seaver Perfection violin had some of the most amazing tone around, and a lot of people compared my work to some of the masters back in the day. And my secret was that I would only use wood that was 200 to 300 years old when constructing my violins. You know, in the label, the little thing that's inside the violin, I would advertise that I use scientific principles to make my violins, and that way you didn't have to use so much brute force when you wanted to get a nice little tone from the violin. Yeah, and you could only buy these things right here in Dover, and I made sure that every single one of them, that I built it with perfection.
I understand you also had 2 patents issued in inventions. I also had a patent issued in 1884 for my phonetarian, an instrument used to reduce muscular tension in the voice. My husband, Charles Mitchell, filed it for me when we lived in Boston.
Yeah, I did have 2 patents, but ironically it had nothing to do with music. One of them was actually a fire extinguisher for car heaters, and the other one was for a cane that could also be used as an umbrella. You know, but my love was really always about constructing violins, just like your love was always for singing. Boy, could she sing. I actually remember reading this one article in the Boston Globe that said, this fine lady with her sweet and well-tuned voice, on top of the fact that she had a fine appearance and great stage manners, she could woo anyone in the crowd.
Thank you, George. We were 2 fairly ordinary people from Dover, New Hampshire who made a difference in the world and hopefully put a smile on people's face who enjoyed good music.
Or a good tune.
Irishmen get some peace around here? Every 15 minutes someone comes tramping through here like they own the place on my family plot. Well, it looks like if I don't tell my story, nobody's going to leave. So if I tell my story, will you go away? My name is Michael Reed, and I know it's been 170 years, but I can still hear the whispers and the asides of the townsfolk. Curmudgeon, grump, miser, Scrooge, cheapskate, and their personal favorite, old sourpuss. That didn't bother me. And I make no qualms about my frugality with a dollar, or a nickel, or a penny. My father, God rest his soul, was one of the first Irish immigrants to come to Dover, 1770. He was went to school with John Sullivan, you know, General Sullivan Bridge, and listened to the preachings of Jeremy Belknap, you know, Belknap Street. He lived, Belknap lived at the top of the street, where Silver Street is, and that brick building, I think Dover Eye Care there, is there now. But his family donated it to the city, who turned it into the Belknap School in 1856. It stayed open to 1953 until Woodman Park was built, and they closed it down. But I digress. If I don't stay on topic, I'm never going to get rid of you folks. I got to stay on topic. We lived at 43 Belknap Street. I've already been on Belknap Street. 43 Main Street. You probably drove by it 100 times. It's just before Genados, just bore Taste of India, and just after you turn onto Portland Avenue. Gray House. Look for it next time you go by. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. All right, well, my father made a small fortune in shipping at the landing, and when he died, he left me a nice tidy sum. I never worked another day in my life. I became what was known as a man of leisure. But I had two sisters, but that's not the way it worked back then. Back then the man got everything and the woman got nothing. How does that make you feel? Okay, you need to talk to Susan B. Anthony and those suffragettes who came through in 1850. But get it right, I didn't leave my sisters in the lurch. I let them stay in the family home. But I made them work and pay rent. So, let's see, there was my sister Sally, and you're on my sister's, Mary's grave. Get off. What are you laughing about? You're on my mother's grave. All right, now every 15 minutes, the same thing. So what did I do with my time? I watched, I observed, and I recorded. Every day from my father's death in 1812 until I died in 1861, I kept what I like to call my interlinear almanac. I wrote down everything I saw, the weather, businesses opening, closing, births, deaths, dignitaries that came to Dover, local affairs, especially the political scene. I kept track of everything. And this became virtual storehouse for all the transactions and transgressions that happened in Dover over a 50-year time in the 1800s. They're now stored in the New Hampshire Historical Society in Concord. Always observing, but never socially active. I never took a wife because I didn't want to spend the courtly cost of a courtship. A lot of money and love. I refused to get involved. I'm not going to ask you. You have a bad opinion on everything. I did socialize a little bit. John Williams and John Hale, who was the father of Lucy, who was engaged to a man called John Wilkes Booth before he got into a little bit of trouble. And Moses Paul, too, who I believe you met here today. But I never wasted a penny, and I make no qualms about it. In fact, Dover residents will concur that despite living in the heart of downtown Dover, all my life, I never patronized the store once. Save Stephen Evans Grocery on Pierce Street for food. Although when the price of butter went over 25 cents a pound, I refused to buy another pan for the rest of my life. I'm gonna ask old Smiley over here. You like my suit?
I do.
Well, get used to it. I wear it 6 straight months of the year. I only own 2, winter and summer. I don't find the need to spend money on anything more. And gloves, forget about them. I never spent a penny on gloves. This is what U19 can stay, go, he can stay. I like his concept on life. This is what I did. I didn't wear gloves. I never wore a hat, just flipped up the collar. Never wore glasses, never bought a pair. All right, no matter how bad my eyesight failed. People got used to my stoop, my walk. Matter of fact, when I was on the topic of walking, when the city decided to level the street in front of my home, to lower the road and install sidewalks, they made me pay to put 6 steps in front of my house. I was so incensed, I never walked on a Dover sidewalk again. I took to walking in the middle of the road till the day I died. I was a staunch Republican. So when that Democrat, James Polk, came through on a whistle-stop tour for re-election, I walked all the way down to the 3rd Street Railroad Station just to turn my back on him. As a matter of fact, I think that's what I'm going to do to you people right now. Get off my property. And you look out for my mother.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Isaac B. Williams, I.B. Williams, and I was the founder of the I.B. Williams Belt Company here in Dover in 1842. Notice on my tombstone that would put me in the very early 20s. When the business was begun. The building was on Orchard Street in Dover, in downtown, not too far from the Pacific Mills, the Cachico Mills. And the Cachico Mills and the other mills in Dover became some of our earlier and long-lasting clients, because what we made was industrial belts, and belts for looms and turbines and factory equipment. We also made belts for steamer trunks, if you remember back then, they were wrapped in belts. And we made smaller items such as Goodyear inner soles and different kinds of laces and ties, including leather shoelaces. We tried to use every bit of the leather that we could and not waste any of it to maximize profits. The business was very successful. Between 1875 and 1892, we had to increase the size of the building on Orchard Street 3 times in order to meet the demand for the supply. We had branches in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago, but the main manufacturing for the belts, the industrial belts, and the lacing was right here in the city of Dover. In 1882, we had reached the point where we were using 45,000 sides of leather per year in order to meet the demand for our product. And I have here what was part of our advertising to show what we were producing. This is the hide from the back of the cow, and this shows that the middle portion from the backbone out was the premier part of the cow, and what was used for the high quality product that we did. And you'll notice that this is marked Cachico, because that was our signature belt, was named the Cachico Belt Company. Now, as you can see, unfortunately in 1885 I died. The business was taken over by my sons, and the business became I.B. Williams and Sons. in early 1900s, we were selling to approximately 4,000 outlets in cities and towns throughout the entire United States. It was a major corporation. And in 1906, the gross income for the business was $1.2 million. That's, back in 1906, that's a fair amount of money. And for a city the size of Dover, which was probably then 8,000 or 9,000 people, that's quite a bit of money. As I said, my sons took over the business. You can see my wife Hannah here outlived me by quite a few years. My son Frank had a daughter, Dorothy Williams Brown, and you'll hear from her shortly about a trip she took to, interesting trip she took to Canada, but I won't spoil that for her to tell you. Now, you may have heard in connection with our business that something about contaminating the Dover waterfront and the phrase Portsmouth by the sea and Dover by the smell. And I just want you to know that that was really a very early example of fake news, and you should ignore anything that you hear about it one way or the other. In my case, it's kind of a unique situation for you people because you have the opportunity of actually going to see my house. And if you go to the Silver Fountain Inn, the corner of Silver Street and Christian Street, you can have tea there some afternoons and luncheon on weekends, and get a first-hand glimpse of how a fairly wealthy merchant in Dover in the 1800s was able to sort of scrape by and eat through at the time. Quite a lovely house if you have the opportunity to do that. So, thank you very much.
It's historical fiction. She wrote it about the development of the cotton mills here in Dover. She wrote it in 1952, I believe. And it's still available at the Dover Public Library. Hello. Hello. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and my family. I am Miss Edith Souther Tufts. I was born in 1862. My grandfather was Asa A. Tufts, an apothecary owner and the postmaster for Dover in 1927. He used to live on Summer Street, number 15. It's now called the Keefe House, and it's part of the Woodman Museum. And then there's my dear niece, Miss Ann Tufts. Ann is a very lovely companion to me. Although I am 24 years older than she, we got to spend a lot of lovely time together until my death in 1935 at 72, right before you turned 50.
You have always been an inspiration to me, Aunt
Oh.
Edith. You graduated from Wellesley College in 1884. Then you went on to Yale to get your master's, then returned to Wellesley to teach. You became the registrar of the college in 1903, then dean of residence in 1919 until you retired in 1930. Never married, you were devoted to your academic pursuits and college administration. There is a beautiful portrait painted of you by famous American impressionist Edmund Tarbell that hangs at Tower Court at Wellesley. I've always wanted to be just like you.
Oh, well, no need to want to be just like me. You have a lovely achieved life. You graduated from Radcliffe in 1907 and got your master's degree in education in 1912 from Columbia, where you then went on to teach high school English in New York City, and then came your wildly popular novel, which prompted you to become a proud member of the Authors Guild in New York City. But you always still had time to come back to summer in Dover. I remember visiting you at your house at 148 Locust Street. You'd come every year,
And you were never married either, but I think that's why you lived to be 105 years old. You were around until 1991.
Wow.
Yes, the Tufts family did very well for ourselves. But see this book right here. This is a scandalous autobiography by a notorious American criminal, Henry Tufts. He's a distant cousin of ours. The Tufts family tried in vain to purchase and destroy every single copy of this book when it was published in Dover in 1807. We didn't want word of our black sheep cousins spreading around, but spread it did. And a narrative of the life, adventures, travels, and sufferings of Henry Tufts became what is known as one of the first instances of criminal autobiographies in American literature. Henry Tufts was known as Old Hen Tuff, and he committed crimes from Maine to Virginia. He was a horse thief, a bigamist, a con artist, a counterfeiter. What else did he do? He was a war criminal. He was a war deserter. He was an all-around bad guy. This book is still available in Dover Public Library to this day. It remains in reprint. Henry Tufts even has his own Wikipedia page. I don't know what that is, but he has one.
Well, I, for one, am very grateful that he is a very distant cousin. In the end, he did vow to reform. The last line of his book is, "Heaven grant me that I may do no more wickedly," or some such something. My advice is pick up Annie's book and skip Henry's. Thank you.
Oh, you caught me. Just passing the time while I wait for my horses to come back. We made it this far and they just stopped. So I'm waiting for some fresh ones. But where are my manners? I am Merchant Freeman, and I'm from just over the border in Maine. Came down here to transport the remains of this gentleman back. He was here at the tomb at Pine Hill Cemetery. We're taking him back over to Maine for burial. I notice that you are looking at my new hearse. It's only 5 years old, built in 1895. It travels at about 2 horses per hour and comes much cheaper than the auto hearses you have today. We charge about $6 a day to use it, whereas an auto hearse will run you 10. Did you know that here in Dover, there were several undertakers? Well, actually, it's the 1900s, start of the 20th century, and we don't call ourselves undertakers anymore. Morticians or funeral directors. It's more than just transporting your loved ones. We provide services for embalming, as well as a home for you to hold the memorial services prior to heading to the church. But here in Dover in the 1900s, there were several morticians. You had Tasker and Chesley, Patrick McGinn, Wigan and Purdy, and Glidden and Glidden. They advertised a lady assistant. Actually, Tasker and Chesley's storefront was right on 3rd Street, right next to a florist. Pretty convenient. And John Glidden even advertised that they did preservation, electroplating, and embalming services. For a busy mill town, you sure had plenty of options in terms of morticians and funeral directors. All good, I'm sure. However, I think I've taken enough of your time. But if my horses don't come back soon, I'll be chasing you all down to help me make sure we get this gentleman back to Maine for the funeral services. Good day.
Good afternoon, everybody. You'll excuse me just for a minute while I pick up these leaves. Daniel Christie and myself like a tidy, eternal resting place. I'm John W. Kingman. I was born in Barrington, New Hampshire in 1821. And in 1849, I married a Dover girl, Mary Christie. Not too long after, I joined the law firm of Daniel Christie and practiced law in Dover until October of 1862. In October of 1862, I was appointed colonel of the 15th New Hampshire Volunteers by Governor Nathaniel Berry of New Hampshire. In November of 1862, I was assigned to the 19th Corps of General Nathaniel Banks and his expedition to Louisiana. Before leaving for Louisiana, I asked all of my officers to take a temperance pledge, and they did. And while in Louisiana, the 15th New Hampshire had the reputation of being the best behaved regiment in the 19th Corps, of which I am quite proud. Not long after coming to Louisiana, the 15th New Hampshire was transferred to Port Hudson, Louisiana, where on May 27, 1863, the 15th New Hampshire participated in the assaults on the earthworks at Port Hudson, Louisiana. According to the 15th New Hampshire regimental historian, Colonel Kingman and Lieutenant Colonel Blair rallied the men on a ravine, Colonel Kingman shouting, "Up, boys, and at 'em!" Seeing movement of the Confederates in the earthworks, Colonel Kingman shouted, "Rally, boys, the devils are running!" The 15th New Hampshire and the Union Army assaults on Port Hudson were not successful. 15th New Hampshire was ordered to withdraw with 21 killed and 140 wounded.